Today is Palm Sunday. Every year we tell the story of Jesus' entry into Jerusalem. It was our hope that our confirmands could help us tell the story this year, but alas, it was not meant to be. But then again, sometimes the impossible is possible. We can find love in the time of cholera.
From the east, the poor are marching. From the east, the poor are marching, spreading branches as they come. From the west, the sound of soldiers marching, marching, far from home. Jesus on a colt comes rising down a dusty city street, with the ragtag peasant chorus hopeful shouting as they meet. Pilate comes in posting order on the festival. Volley cheer, war horse drum beat, armored soldiers, silent crowds look on with fear. To precision, to the city, shepherd staff and Roman sphere, blessed in the Son of David, who will bring God's kingdom here.
The song May sang was Daniel Charles Damon's reflection on a recent book by Marcus Borg and John Dominic Crossan. Confirmands are familiar with Borg. The entire curriculum for their journey has come straight from Marcus Borg. Anyway, 12 years ago, the historians Borg and Crossan told us that there were riots associated with Passover circa the 30th year of the Common Era. And so, at each Passover, the Roman governor, Pilate in the time of Jesus, rode up to Jerusalem from the imperial capital Caesarea on the coast, at the head of a cohort of imperial cavalry and troops to reinforce the Roman garrison in Jerusalem as a deterrent against and preparation for any possible trouble. Pilate's procession, arriving from the west, symbolized and actualized Roman imperial power. Jesus enters from the east on a donkey. And sure, Matthew connects the event with the prophetic words of Zechariah, but in the historical moment, as Borg and Crossan point out, the contrast is clear. Jesus versus Pilate. The nonviolence of the kingdom of God versus the violence of empire. Two arrivals, two entrances, two processions. What Crossan and Borg point out is that in many ways, Jesus mocks the imperial power. Jesus on a donkey satirizes Pilate on his war horse. Emperors and empires do not enjoy being mocked. The powers that be want to be feared. They do not want to be objects of scorn or derision. I was reminded of these imperial dispositions as I was getting ready to visit Central America about this time last year. I read the histories and visited some of the places where empires and imperial forces have lived and continue to live. I had the opportunity to visit El Salvador, and therein lies one of my regrets. I was unable to visit the capital, San Salvador. For many years, I have told a story about San Salvador. From approximately 1979 until 1992, El Salvador was in the midst of a civil war. The war, as all wars are, was complex. On November 16th, 1989, 3 years before the end of the war, elements of the El Salvadoran army raided the University of Central America in San Salvador, killing 6 priests. There were reasons, the army argued, for the killing. These priests were teaching liberation theology, after all. One may wonder why, in a war where countless innocents were killed, we tell the story of this one raid. Did the deaths of these priests matter any more than the deaths of the countless others? Certainly, there are parallels between the mass murder perpetrated by the Roman Empire through countless crucifixions and the countless deaths by the imperial forces seen in moments such as these. And yes, sometimes there are moments that stand out. It is not that some lives matter more than others, but within the historical events, some events become moments of crystallization. Yes, there are countless other holy places born of tragedy and death. But on this Palm Sunday, I want us to return to this one holy place. Among the priests in El Salvador was John Sobrino, but he was not there when the raid occurred. Although he lived and taught with the priests, he was traveling. He talks about returning to the destruction, the horror, and the grief. As he tried to clean up, put things back in place, he found that one book had fallen off the bookshelf and was stained with blood. It was Jürgen Moltmann's The Crucified God. Today, that blood-stained book is on display there in San Salvador. And perhaps someday I will have the opportunity to make that pilgrimage. Moltmann's book is holy for 100 other reasons. I loved it long before I really knew this story. In fact, the way Moltmann reads the event is to see the book covered in blood as marking these deaths. It is the blood-stained book about the crucified God that makes these deaths different, helps us to see them and all deaths by imperial powers differently. Either way, as we tell the story of empires and political executions, it is to this book, and therefore this story, that I return every year around this time. As Lillian Daniel has said, Palm Sunday is a gateway into Holy Week. It opens up for us this space in which we walk towards Golgotha with Christ. We stand at the cross. And so every Palm Sunday points toward the Passion. As we open up Holy Week, I return to Moltmann. It is a sizable book. We do not have the time to interrogate it, and yet Moltmann helps us think through the events of Holy Week in a way that follows and builds and returns us to Crossin and Borg. There were 2 processions that day. Jesus mocks, rebels against, challenges the empire. Jesus was crucified by the Romans for tactical and political reasons of peace and good order. Crucifixion at that time was a political punishment for rebellion against the social and political order of the Imperium Romanum. Jesus was crucified in the name of the state gods of Rome who assured the Pax Romana. Jesus was crucified not only because of the understanding of the law by his contemporaries, or because of Roman power politics, but ultimately because of his God and Father. Here Moltmann brings us back to Jesus' cry of absence and abandonment on the cross. My God, why have you forsaken me? There is a threefold rejection of Jesus manifest in the crucifixion. As a blasphemer, Jesus was rejected by the guardians of his people's law. As a rebel, he was crucified by the Romans. But finally, and most profoundly, he died as one rejected by his God and Father. Every year, we tell this story in these most holy of days. This story that shapes the reality of all of our days. Particularly in these days of grief, fear, and isolation, let us remember that in the cross of Christ, God reveals God's self as unconditional love. Because he takes on himself grief as the contradiction in humanity and does not angrily suppress this contradiction, God allows himself to be forced out. God suffers. God allows himself to be crucified and is crucified. And in this, consummates his unconditional love. There were 2 processions. So on this Palm Sunday, as we stand in the space between those processions and find that the day opens up for us the holiness of the Passion, let us live into the fullness of the memory that we sang our glad hosannas.
We sang our glad hosannas and waved our branches high, but some were silent temple courts declare, begone, you money changers, this is a house of prayer. Though many came for healing and stayed to hear his word, still others hostile plotting, and thus his death assured. We heard him at the reserved table, with wine unleavened bread. The one who will betray me now eats with me, he said. His friends would not believe him, but one by one that night, as soldiers came to take him, they scurried out of sight. We